This is Jennifer Gonzalez, welcoming you to episode 272 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, we'll explore the replacement skills approach to discipline problems. Discipline is one of those things that frustrates most educators well into their careers. Most of us have seen enough ineffective discipline play out in schools to feel a little cynical about whether anything actually works long term. What far too many teachers see far too often is this. A student acts out, gets sent to the office, is given some kind of punishment, then comes back and does it again. The cycle repeats, maybe with increasing levels of harshness on the punishments, but rarely with any real change in behavior. Today's guest has observed the same problem, but because of his background, he sees a different solution. Nathan Maynard spent 7 years working in residential youth care before transitioning into education, and that experience gave him a lens most educators don't have. In youth care, behavior was treated as information. You asked why it happened, identified the skill the person was missing, and then taught that skill. Schools, he found, rarely worked that way. That observation became the driving question behind his new book, The Science of Discipline: 8 Strategies for Empowering Educators and Engaging Students. In the book, Maynard argues that the most common misbehaviors aren't caused by character flaws. The underlying cause is more often a skill gap. And if that's true, then punishment alone will never fix the problem. What works instead is something he calls the replacement skills approach. Identifying the skill a student was missing in a moment of misbehavior, teaching it explicitly, reinforcing the skill, then guiding the student toward repair. What I love about this approach is how it comes at each situation with a belief in the student's ability to grow and improve, a deep belief in their inherent worth and goodness. And that's something I think we can always use more of in our schools. Over on Cult of Pedagogy, Maynard has written a detailed post about what this looks like in practice, using sample scenarios that most teachers deal with all the time, from the student who can't stop talking, to the one who shuts down completely, to the one who explodes. In each situation, he shows how to identify and teach clear skills that can really change the student's behavior, rather than just punishing it. In this episode, he'll walk us through each example. Whether you're a teacher, a counselor, or a school administrator, if discipline is something you haven't quite mastered, I think you're going to find something here that solves a problem for you. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Erickson Institute for sponsoring this episode. If you're listening to this while mentally counting down the minutes to the end of the day, you're not alone. Too many educators who love teaching are burning out fast. Erickson Institute's Social Emotional Learning Certificate can help you reconnect with why you started teaching, while offering you real strategies to provide the support your students need. This completely online program is designed for educators who are overwhelmed, emotionally drained, yet still deeply committed to their students. Get support and solutions that can impact you and your students. To learn more and apply for full tuition scholarships, visit cultofpedagogy.com/SEL certificate. Support also comes from ListenWise, providing short, high-quality, age-appropriate podcasts for grades 2 through 12. Save time with pre-made lessons and build students' background knowledge and academic vocabulary. Keep students on grade level with scaffolding and differentiation. ListenWise now offers the Writing Assessor, a new tool that provides instant, actionable feedback to help students become more confident and capable communicators. The Writing Assessor generates English language proficiency levels and identifies strengths and growth areas, saving teachers time and giving every student the valuable feedback they need to improve. Start a free trial today at listenwise.com. Now here's my conversation with Nathan Maynard about teaching replacement skills. Hey, Nathan.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. It's good to have you back on the podcast. It's been quite a while now since you were on, so this is great.
Yeah, I'm excited to be back on. It's been several years.
Yeah. It's funny because what we talked about last time was repairing harm, which
Yep.
is very, very close to what we're talking about today. So, really sort of drilling down to the finer points of discipline. So, let's just start by having you tell, for people that are just meeting you for the first time, tell me a little bit about your background in education, and
Yeah.
then we'll talk about the book.
Of course. Yeah. So I've had 17 total years in education. My
Mm-hmm.
first 7 years, I was a youth worker. I worked in a residential treatment care center. So I worked with youth that were incarcerated or working with Department of Child Services. Then from there, I went into education and I was a college career readiness coordinator, went into assistant principal position. And then I helped open up a school with Purdue University. And that was called Purdue Polytechnic High School. And that was designed as a project-based learning school. And then from there, I wrote Hacking School Discipline. And the last 8 years, I've been working with schools across the United States and international.
Yeah. And so I think that's a really important. I just want to underscore your background is with kids who, for lack of a better term, have had discipline problems pretty significantly. Like you started exclusively with that population.
Yes, exclusively. And I was working with kids from the ages of 8 to 21, and they were diagnosed with, things I only saw in a textbook at school or read about in a movie. And, I was dealing with sort of the pinnacles of violence in communities. And I was looking at ways to sort of get them rehabilitated through these different programs, sometimes for several years into these different programmings. But what would it look like for them to be successful long term?
Yes, yes. And so the book that you just mentioned earlier from a while back, Hacking School Discipline, you and Brad Weinstein wrote that together, and you guys were on the podcast for that.
Yes.
But now you have a new book. And so if you could just talk a little bit about how this new book, The Science of Discipline, came to be.
Yeah, definitely. So what I was realizing was a lot of the work that I did from Hacking School Discipline, I was bringing it into schools, and there were certain things that was resonating with educators. There were certain things that I feel like I had to continue to adapt based on the different environment. Mm-hmm. When I was coming through, what I was realizing was there's certain different things that may work in every universal environment, and there's certain things that we have to really fine tune a little bit. So Science of Discipline really came out through those different traveling, working with schools, and finding out what educators were really looking for in the discipline practices.
Okay. And so tell me a little bit more about the book. What is it that you are, how is this book different maybe from other books on classroom management and discipline? And how is it going to benefit teachers that have struggled with this?
So I think that right now, the main thing that I've leaned into that's very different is I lean into consequences a lot in this book. And I lean into what does accountability look like for students. So I talk about progressive, logical discipline, ways to repair the harm through this. Mm-hmm. And then I also talk a lot about replacement skills that we're going to be talking about and different ways to focus on a sense of building up skills for kids if they lack a certain skill.
Yeah. You've written a guest post about this topic that we're going to talk about. And so, and you and I have talked, and I've also read like chunks of the book and the introduction and everything. So before we start to get into replacement skills, talk to me about how schools typically handle discipline issues and where your approach is different.
Yes. So I think that schools typically are handling discipline issues between two major flows. You have minor behaviors, which is dealt with in the classroom, and you have major behaviors that are dealt with school administrators. Mm-hmm. What I see is the system starts to break down if there's not good balance on both sides. So if the school classroom doesn't have good minor consequences to handle discipline, or the school administrators don't have good major consequences to deal with discipline, they start to lean on each other, and then they don't trust each other as well. So what I've been trying to do is pair those bridges together and what sort of the universal package that a school needs as a system.
Okay. Wow. I don't think I've ever heard anybody point that out. And it's such a huge thing that I hear from teachers all the time. Like our admin doesn't back us up, or, or administrators saying that, teachers don't know how to handle the minor consequences, in classroom, minor infractions. Gosh, that's really interesting. Okay. So the book has a lot to it. It's a whole lot in there. But when you and I talked, I said, let's pull something out of there that I have not seen much of. So maybe it is already out there, but I haven't seen much of it. And I think this will be something kind of a little bit more fresh for teachers. And then we will recommend that they, go and read the whole book. But tell me what is this concept of replacement skills?
So I think that this concept was birthed out of a lot of the work that I was doing as a youth worker. When I was starting, mainly out of, when I was teaching anger management, what I realized is a lot of times there's certain behaviors that a kid has displayed that has gotten them in trouble. And sometimes that behavior has came out because of a lack of skill that they have. Maybe it's a regulation skill, maybe it's a communication, conflict resolution. There's all sorts of different reasons why. So what I've been focused on is what can we do to equip educators with a framework of how they can look at behavior differently, and then what they can do to replace that into it. So if a kid couldn't read, for example, we're not going to put them in detention until they can magically start to read again. Same thing with behavior. We can't say just to do better next time, or you should have known better. We need to teach the explicit skill.
Yeah. Yes. I think that what we typically try to do is just kind of like suppress behavior and then also create enough pain in the student that they just want to stop doing it. And I think most people listening would agree that that really has limited success with most kids. Some kids can like suck it up and just sort of like white knuckle through, but they're not necessarily changing. And that this is where replacement skills really comes in. You're talking about actually changing their behavior sort of from the inside out.
Yes. And them realizing this too, like them understanding and having autonomy around their own behaviors and agency. I think that a lot of times, even when I was younger, I used to disconnect a lot when I would act out because I was just labeled as the bad kid. So I just lived in it. So when someone would try to hold me accountable, I didn't really care too much to go through. So what I try to do is move it back into the responsibility on the student as well as the collective stakeholders, and not just too much on one or the other.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that because I forgot about that piece of your story, that you really do know what you're talking about because you were there as a kid.
For sure. Sure. Yep. Yeah.
Can you just maybe just to establish that a little bit more, like how bad did it get?
Well, I mean, it was pretty rough for me for a while. Mainly in middle school is when I started struggling the most. And it was a lot of trauma manifesting into negative behaviors into schools. But I used the school environment as a playground. I had, tons of referrals. I was getting removed out of the classroom a lot. I remember certain kids weren't allowed to, hang out with me. Like I would hear certain things in the cafeteria with certain people. So I started to really embrace that. So even when I was around other people, I acted out a lot because I wanted control over my own attention, and I didn't want other people to have control over my attention, it felt like.
Yeah. Wow. What we're going to be doing is going through 4 example scenarios so that people can sort of see how this replacement skills approach works. Before we do, though, I'm actually scrolling down to the bottom of your post because you talk about 2 prerequisites that really... It's one thing to understand how to teach students replacement skills and see examples, but if these other 2 things aren't in place, that approach may not work as well. So why don't we start with the prerequisites? What has to be in place before replacement skills can work?
Yeah. I sort of tease this a little bit with my own anecdote a little bit, but I would say you want to separate the behavior from the identity. I would say that sometimes when you start labeling a kid over and over again, they start to embrace that label. So I think it's really important to separate this. I talk about in the book, the difference between guilt and shame. Shame is something we want to avoid. Guilt is something that's sort of a responsibility based on your actions around other things. But we want to make sure that shameful practices pairs up to a sense of identity, and that's tough to break for kids. So we want to separate the behavior from the identity first off.
Okay. And so we're trying really hard to not stop. And I hear this so often when teachers talk about certain kids, we get so frustrated with them that they do end up getting those labels sometimes before they've even met a teacher.
Yep. Exactly.
As they're transitioning to a new grade, they come with a reputation in place already. So, okay. So then what is the other? And
the other one, regulate before you reason. So what does it look like to really focus on keeping yourself regulated and making sure that the other student or students are regulated before you teach a replacement skill? I think a lot of times we in the discipline practice, we have emotions, we have feelings, because sometimes we are the ones that are wronged as the educator. So we want a quick reaction or a quick sort of situation to take place. And we've got to make sure that we are regulated, they're regulated before we can sort of teach.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I really like that you're bringing in the teacher's emotions to this, because so many discipline issues can be made so much worse by the teacher's natural organic reaction to it. Emotion. I mean, that's a huge factor in all of this. So, okay, let's now start looking at some examples of what it looks like to teach a kid replacement skills.
Yeah, so I would say the first, example would be, a common behavior that we're seeing in the classroom is a student that won't stop talking in the classroom. So maybe the teacher has done redirections, there's other things taking place, but we are trying to understand why this behavior is happening. Let's say that after uncovering, we find out the missing skill for the student is impulse control and patience. So we want to explicitly teach impulse control and patience as the consequence in that classroom as the replacement skill. So what that does is the teacher still is focusing on that behavior, that's the student talking while other people are talking, but now they're focusing this attention on replacing the skill. So what this teacher can do is they can come up with a couple different strategies to help embed how it means to wait until it's your turn to speak. What does it look like to hold your thoughts in and then sort of have the appropriate expectation in that classroom? So a couple things that I talk about in the book is, a silent signal with the student. That could be something where you co-constructed this at the desk with the student during a redirection. And you say, hey, next time, I hear you talking, I'm going to tap my shoulder and we're going to make eye contact. And if you see me tap my shoulder, that just means be mindful that you may be talking while other people are talking. Some sort of silent signal like that can be great. I have ran into sometimes students avoiding eye contact with us when the silent signals directly, because so sometimes they work really well, sometimes they don't. So all these strategies sometimes work, sometimes they don't.
Okay. Yeah.
And then, talking buddies, also a great one as well. So what does it look like to have someone that is a designated peer partner for them to work with on projects? And then also focusing on a designated share time, and then acknowledging when they have been waiting and when they're patient to share, is all ways that we can reinforce the skill to keep them regulated, to help hold back the impulse control.
Yes. I'm seeing this thread running throughout all four of these examples. You're giving some really practical ideas and then saying when the student responds appropriately, we need to be acknowledging it, praising, really reinforcing that positively. Let me go back really quickly. Explain a little bit more about what is a talking buddy. Does this mean that they can just turn to this talking buddy anytime and just talk in class?
No. So what it is it's a designated sort of a time or outlet for them to share something with somebody else, and they know who they can share with. Sometimes what we have is with impulse control. It means that we just don't have control over our impulses on a basic level. So having them have a designated person that they're sharing with during the appropriate time is helping focus that big impulse control on something a little bit more concrete with them. Other students may not need that explicit skill. So when it's time that they can talk with others, they know who they can talk to and do this type of stuff. With the student that's working on the skill, it helps them having more a designated person.
Okay. I also noticed that when you're talking about the designated share time, that you also add on the strategy of telling the student if they have a thought, here's some sticky notes, you can jot them down, and then I will be giving you time to share. I think there's a difference between just randomly telling students that they can talk now and saying it's coming soon, and that can help them with that impulse control.
Yes. And previewing that's coming forward, that helps them understand when they can, speak, or when's that next sort of opportunity for them too. So I like that, the previewing.
Yeah. And so much of this too, what's so nice about it is it's really a partnership between the teacher and the student. This is not just be quiet and stop talking. It's a real collaboration of, we're working together on this skill.
Yep. Yeah. And it humanizes it for the student and for the teacher too.
Yeah. Plus, what's nice about this, I'm thinking right now about one kid, but this is a system you can just repeat with multiple students.
Yep.
Hey, this is Jen. I am going to interrupt this episode for just a minute to tell you about something I think will be a big help to you as an educator, whether you're a teacher, a school leader, an instructional coach, or even someone studying to become a teacher. It's something I've been publishing for the last 10 years called The Teacher's Guide to Tech, and it's basically an encyclopedia of tech tools curated especially for teachers. My team and I keep an eye on all the tech tools that are out there, the ones that are fresh and new, and the ones that have stood the test of time, and we think about how they can best be used in classrooms. Then we sort them into categories, give you a really simple description of what each one does, provide a link to the tool's website so you can check it out, and we also pick out a video that shows the tool in action so you can understand quickly how it works and if it will work for you. And because tech changes all the time, we have to maintain these listings to make sure they stay fresh and accurate. On top of that, we have a really nice collection of articles we've written that will help you explore more ways to use tech and fine-tune and troubleshoot things as you go along. Plus, there's a huge glossary of tech terms to help you stay current with the language. In the past, this guide was published as a PDF that we updated once a year. Although this worked fine, that PDF would stay the same all year until the new edition came out. In January of 2025, we moved the entire guide to a fully online subscription-based model. This allows us to update it all year round, keeping it fresh and new all the time. A year's subscription costs exactly the same as the PDF used to cost, so we haven't raised the price one bit, and it's even more affordable if you get it as a group. To learn more about how this guide can help you become the most tech-savvy teacher in your school, visit teachersguidetotech.com. Okay, so that's our first one, and that's such a common issue too. Students who just can't stop talking. So That's our first example. The second one is the student who shuts down. Describe what the problem is and what we typically do with this.
Yeah. So, let's say a student is shutting down in the classroom and we're noticing they're shutting down, after we ask them to start doing a task or something. What we have to do is we have to, again, seek to understand what this behavior is communicating. Let's say that we understand that the skill gap is that the student needs direct instruction or the ability to learn how to ask for help. So the skill that I want to communicate with this student is, how do you ask for help instead of shutting down in the future? So instead of telling them just don't shut down and do your work, I'm teaching them how to ask for help concretely.
Yes.
So what we focus on is concrete scaffolding. What part don't they understand and what part do they need help with? So how can you get really granular into this? And then also, how can you focus on how can they get your attention at that time to ask for the question? Do you have some sort of signal system for the whole class? And that means that everyone's got the opportunity to ask questions to people? Or is this a time where you can sort of raise your hand and ask things? Helping them explicitly know how to ask for that help and when to ask for help helps them not feel so stressed out when that help is needed.
Yes. And I like the idea of a signal besides just raising your hand, because that's a very vulnerable feeling. I mean, even as an adult in a room of other adults, putting your hand up, all of a sudden everybody can see. And if you don't get called on, or it's embarrassing. And so having something else, you recommended like a colored cup system where the different colors mean different things, or and then also,
hand signals too is good. Like I've noticed, like some students, like what I've done with them is they don't want to raise their hand. So they do something like at their chest level for me. So they know. So like a quick thumbs up at their chest level, right underneath their chin, or hands flat means like, I'm a little confused, but don't worry. And thumb down mean, hey, come talk to me in a little bit. And I use something like that just helps push away the pressure of the rest of the peers, maybe making them not feel like they can ask for help.
Yes. Yes. Also, let's also go back to this idea of teaching them how to ask for help. And we had actually just talked about, Connie Hamilton had written a fantastic article about, this is the last article I published before COVID hit. I always remember this one. So it's in 2020. And the article is called Kick the IDK Bucket. And she's talking about kids who their answer is, I don't know, but they actually mean probably one of about 10 more specific things. So it's all about providing them with sentence stems so that they learn how to ask for what they actually need.
And I love Connie's work and especially the work on that, because I think that a lot of times students don't know sometimes what they want to say. Like I have an 11-year-old son, and sometimes even when he gets in the car and I'm like, how was your day? And he just goes, good. I'm like, I know all the things around it, so like I can keep going. But people like Connie, they have a really clear structure. So I love the work that she's done around that.
Yes. So we're going to link over to that. And that's also another podcast episode to listen to that really helps educate students on how to get what you need. And a lot of kids just have no idea how to ask for exactly what they need, or even how to identify the problem in the first place. They just know that they're stuck. So, okay, that was our second scenario. The third one, and we're getting more serious now, is a student who acts out violently. So maybe give me a sort of situation that might be typical.
Yeah. So, and I'm thinking of something where it might not be to a physical fight, but let's say that the teacher redirected the student got upset, the student yelled at the teacher, flipped over a desk and walked out of the classroom, something like this. We know that, during this time, there's going to be a logical consequence that takes place, and that consequence has to be progressive. So if this is the more than first time this happened, it has to escalate. But again, looking at replacement skills, we're focusing on the skill of self-regulation for the student and their ability to identify their anger and different ways to cope with this anger. So for this replacement skill, what I would focus on for the student is teaching self-regulation. Teaching self-regulation for a student that displays big violent behaviors that can hurt other people or really cause a lot of harm in the environment isn't something where we just want to teach them deep breathing for a couple minutes and try to get them back in the classroom. If they're displaying the bigger behaviors, what I focus on in the book is the anger cycle, having the students understand what their triggers are, what set them off, what's their cues, what's their body telling them, internal, external, then what's their coping skill. Because what I've learned is sometimes we try to teach self-regulation as the replacement skill, as the coping skill, before the students understand when to use it. So they're trying to use it after they've already flipped over the desk and walked out of the classroom, when really they should have done this when they're sitting at the desk right before they got upset, when they noticed their hands started getting hot, or right after that peer called them a name that they don't like, which was their trigger. So going upstream and teaching them in this replacement skill, the anger cycle and a self-regulation tactic, helps them have those sort of the skills to understand themselves better.
Yeah, which is just, for so many kids that have these kinds of issues, having that kind of vocabulary at hand too, to sort of understand what's happening. It's going to help them so far beyond just the classroom.
Yep. Yes.
So I love that. And then after that, then they're doing things like deep breathing and imagery and things like that. But that has to happen once they recognize what's going on.
Exactly. Because if the student starts to realize what their triggers are and they say, okay, here's my 3 hot triggers, that if any of these 3 things happen, like I am, 0 to 100 real fast in this situation, they know as soon as the trigger happens, they have to do a coping skill before their body lets them know. If their body lets them know later, they have to do the coping skill right away, or they may make a not the best decision. So by training the students to understand this, that vocabulary starts coming in. So they start realizing what their triggers are, and then they can also avoid their triggers too. So it's a good long-term skill for them to develop.
Yeah. I would also think, I'm thinking about the partnering with the talking, that there could also be like partnering with the teacher as the student is learning what their triggers are, some sort of a signal or communication to the teacher, like, it's getting hot under the hood here.
Yes, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like,
yep.
Yeah. So, and again, as they start to put that into practice, reinforce it positively, really praise them and acknowledge what they're doing.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. And then the last one, we have a lighter situation again. We're going from like the super heavy to something a little bit more, but probably very common, is tardiness. Students that are like frequently late. What can we do about that?
Yeah, so I would say, frequently late, the typical skill that's missing at that time is time management or transition planning. Sometimes that really bleeds into also just like social peer relationships, especially at the secondary level. I see a lot of like, middle schoolers, high schoolers start wandering off and talking to their, boyfriend, girlfriend, stuff like this. Yeah. But the skill is a lot around time management and transitional planning. So what we do for that replacement skill is we want to teach them sort of what the transitions may look like between the class periods at a secondary level. So what would that look like to go from, some of the schools I work with may have 3 different levels of classrooms. having the student as a consequence, mapping out their routes that they take from first period to second period, from second period to third period, from fourth to fifth period, and then holding them accountable based on that map, even for one day as a school administrator, helps reinforce this replacement skill of time management and understanding where to sort of balance their schedule and where to go.
You've also mentioned a personal alarm system.
Yes. So, and this goes into, and again, right now, there's a lot of cell phone bans out there, and I've been talking about this, out there, and what stuff is. So I feel like this has now shifted quite a bit with the way cell phones are not being appropriately used in schools.
Yeah.
But I have seen students in the past set alarms on their phones or a vibration that would set off to help them know they've got 1 minute left in the passing period. So that means you got to keep it moving at that time. But I think that the way the phones are right now, I don't know how well that would work in the system, but it does also help us stay accountable with a personal alarm system.
Right. I mean, I know that I recently discovered that I have ADHD, which explains so many things. And the number of notes I have to post for myself and alarms that I have to set off on my phone, I would not function without being able to do that. So
exactly.
I think for a lot of our kids that also have attention issues, there's just almost no other solution than something physical that's going to say, hey.
Yep, exactly. And and I also think, when it comes to classroom tardies too, it's about making sure the school system as a whole has good accountability also. So does all the teachers close their door at the same time? What's the consequences for being tardy so many times? Are we doing hall sweeps? Things like that, sort of tighten up the system so we actually know which students have the skill gaps and not which students are responding to sort of our laxed system at the school.
Okay. That's reminding me of somebody I know who's dealing with that. It's just like, if the kids are just hanging out in the hall and nobody's making them go, then.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And also, this is I think a really important piece too, is that you suggest that teachers actually track their days on time as opposed to tracking their tardiness, especially once you've put a plan into place, and reinforce, you have been on time 5 days in a row. And that's a nice dopamine hit for people that like tracking stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the more that we recognize the positive skills that we want to see in the students, the more those skills will duplicate. But the more we spend the energy on the negative skills, the more those things start to sometimes manifest into other things too, without us addressing them.
Yes. Okay, Nathan, so you have given us a ton of great strategies. I have a feeling teachers are going to listen to this sort of on repeat to learn this. So there is a blog post where you've outlined all this stuff in writing, so they can go there and find out more about that. If they want to learn more from you or get the book, where should people go online?
So LinkedIn, I'm the most active on, just Nathan Maynard on LinkedIn. I also just recently started a Instagram page called Nathan Maynard Official. And I'm going to be posting a lot of videos on there and stuff like that over these different skills. And then I have my website, Science of Discipline, and then my work with High Five as well.
Okay. And remind us, what is High Five? Because I didn't mention that in the intro with you.
Yeah. So High Five is an organization that has merged over the course of 8 years for me. What I've been doing with this organization is working with schools that need extra support with discipline practices. So we have resources and programming, and then we also I go in there, other people, and we train.
Okay, great. And I'll put links to all this stuff in the show notes and over on the blog post too, so people can go and find it. So the new book is The Science of Discipline.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming on again. This has been great.
Yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for having me on again.
Thanks. To read Maynard's article and find links to his book, visit cultofpedagogy.com, click podcast, and choose episode 272. To get a regular email from me about my newest blog posts, podcast episodes, courses, products, and speaking services, sign up for my mailing list at cultofpedagogy.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.